welcome to the darn show.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be talking with you.
I have to be honest. We're in Nimbus Kitchen here in Brooklyn. There's how many of them?
We have 4 locations around New York.
Okay. I was totally surprised with what this is. And there's a million more questions I have now than when I had planned coming here. So I'm excited. But anyways, nice to see you in person.
I know we met right when I was starting out, and I don't think we've actually met in person yet. So it's good to see you, to see your face.
We haven't met in person, and I do want to give a shout out though, because I believe we met through a mutual friend, Alex Beltrani.
The best.
He is.
Shout out to Tattle.
If you don't know Alex Beltrani and Tattle, first of all, Tattle's awesome. It's a customer insight product, but Alex is just incredible. I met him when I still owned restaurants, and I bought his product mostly just because of him. And
his energy, sorry to interrupt, is unparalleled. I met him for the first time and was just blown away with how kind and giving he was with his time. He is awesome.
Yeah, and just an incredible entrepreneur as well. Yeah. He's coming on the show, so
amazing.
But let's talk about you. I want to talk about your background, and we're going to get into that. But we're going to start with New Haven, because you went to Yale. Yale is a college, a university that some people go to. It's pretty easy to get into. You can kind of I think if you get a 2.0 in high school, you can get in. But anyways, it's a college in New Haven. Kidding. I love New Haven. I actually spent a lot of time there when I was starting a restaurant called Bark. And we were researching mostly actually hot dogs, because there's a place called Frank's there. And we've been. But let's talk pizza for a minute. We got Sally's, we have Pepe's, we have Bar, Modern. What's your pick?
I'm so glad you mentioned Bar, because that is absolutely my favorite.
Oh my God, it's so good.
It's so good. Most people automatically default to Sally's or Pepe's, which is fine. I think they're great pizza. Honestly, I think I like Bar the most because of its proximity to campus. It's like a 2-minute walk from where I lived, versus Sally's, Pepe's, and Modern are all 15, 20 minutes away, which when you're in college, that feels like a world away. But the Bar crust, that thin crust, their toppings are unparalleled. Yeah. I don't know.
And most people, sheet,
oh my gosh, it's incredible. And most people default to the mashed potato pizza, which is good, but the eggplant parm is out of this world. And weirdly, their salad is really good. I don't like salad.
Never had their salad.
I'm not a big salad gal, but for whatever reason, their caramelized nuts and the pears and the blue cheese, it is such an incredible experience. I'm actually going there this weekend.
So how much are those pizza joints a part of the culture when you go to Yale, or is it sort of, some people do, some people don't?
I think it's one of those things for move-in. When your parents are there, you do the pizza tour. At graduation, you do the pizza tour again. And then most people, maybe 1 or 2 times throughout their time, their 4 years there, will go to one or all of those pizza places. I would say Bar is the most integral to campus culture, just again, because of that proximity, and also because it's a physical bar where you can go and drink.
Yeah.
But it's not, the end all be all of food in New Haven. Honestly, campus dining was incredible.
Really?
I ate in the dining halls all 4 years, 3 meals a day. It was incredible. So I think a lot of people default to that because it's so good.
Wow. All right. That's cool. But between Sally's and Pepe's, did you have a...
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I can pick.
I think so I love the clam pie. And also there's a place that actually it's closed now. It's called Franny's. It was in Brooklyn. And I think they kind of recreated what was the clam pie from Sally's, but that for me is the best pie. Bacon, clams, cream. I don't think there's any cheese on there.
Have you had the clam from Bar?
No.
You need to do a one-to-one comparison, because that one's really good too.
Yeah. It's just, I don't even really compare Bar and Sally, because it's so
a different pizza.
Yeah.
Exactly. These are the hard-hitting questions, so I'm really glad we opened with this one.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I didn't know about you was that you were a pretty incredible gymnast. And that is sort of what brought you to Yale. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I grew up doing gymnastics. I did it from the time I was 3. By the time I was 7, was training 20, 25 hours a week, and then did it all 4 years in college. So ended up being the captain of the team, still really involved with the organization. It was an incredible part of my experience there. The girls I competed with were amazing. I loved the coaches. And then the sport itself is just so wonderful. So, gymnastics was not the reason I went to Yale. I was fine going to college without gymnastics, but it was definitely the cherry on top of my experience there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what does it take to be a great gymnast? I don't know anything about the sport.
Grit, a little bit of an insanity as well. Honestly, I think there are a lot of parallels between being a competitive gymnast and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You're falling on your face 10, 20 times a day. You have to get up with a smile on your face and go again. And I think that is, candidly, when we're hiring, why I screen for athletes. I actually have a gymnast that I used to work with or compete with on the Nimbus team now, because I know that she has that grit and the determination that's going to get her standing up again and persevering in the face of adversity.
Yeah, and it's also it seems ultra competitive, and it's funny. I totally agree. And another sort of industry is ballet, like dancers.
Oh my gosh.
Especially in New York. It is the most intense, competitive, gritty,
but they make it look effortless.
Oh my God.
And that's the whole thing. You have to look like you're having the time of your life and it's so easy and you're floating in ballet across the floor and gymnastics across the beam, when really it's such a mentally taxing and physically taxing sport.
Yeah. And it's one of those, it's not zero sum, but there's only so many folks in Alvin Alley. There's only so many folks that get to Broadway. Yeah. And this is independent of gymnastics, but yeah, when I would find a dancer who was really who clearly was incredible, I'm like, hired, because the amount of effort, that goes into that. And it sounds like it's very similar to being a gymnast.
Super similar. And I also think if you're able to keep up the level of athletics, you're training 4 or 5 hours a day while also maintaining an academic record that can get you into a place like Yale or any of the great schools that are out there, you're going to know how to work hard.
Yeah.
And you're going to know how to succeed. So you're automatically going to be a good employee. So I could not agree more on that strategy.
And I have to imagine, I don't know anything about Ivy League schools. We were just talking before this how I went to, I've my degree is in culinary arts. That's about it. But what's the biggest takeaway from a school like Yale? Because I imagine socially, sort of the things that you learn about people and the networks that you develop is just as much as the information that you're ingesting.
I think that's exactly the learning that I took away. Of course, the information is important, but fostering relationships and who you know and how you're able to show up every day when you meet people is just as important, if not more. And I think that's really translated into the working world. Going back to Alex, for example, I met him when I was just starting out. It was pre-pandemic. I had an idea and a deck. Somehow got introduced to him, and he made so many connections for me just because we had a really great interpersonal interaction. And that really opened a lot of doors for me. And so I think the EQ piece of things and being a nice person and being willing to and open to those kinds of relationships is so important when building a business and just in life in general. So Yale definitely taught me that.
Are you still in contact with a lot of the folks that you hung out with at Yale?
Yeah, I lived with the same girls all 4 years in college, after college as well. I'm married now, so I'm unfortunately no longer living with them, but they were.
Is that unfortunate?
I know I've moved on, but they were bridesmaids in my wedding. We're still best friends. I'm still very involved in the gymnastics team. I'm going back this weekend for an alumni meet.
That's cool.
So the relationships I forged there were really incredible, and the people I met really. There were athletes, there were non-athletes, there were people who are up on Science Hill, there were economists, there were lawyers. It was a really diverse group of people, and we still text every day, and we're still best friends.
How do you keep up with gymnastics? Is there like a obviously you can go play basketball or you can go running, but what's is there just like a place where you'd go and just do gymnastics? That sounds terrible.
Oh, after graduation?
I mean? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's no way.
Yeah.
My body cannot handle that. I did go at Chelsea Piers. They have an open gym. And when I was dating my now husband, who's just my boyfriend of 2 months, we did an open gym class together. I couldn't walk the next day.
Yeah.
It had only been a couple of years since I graduated, but it's not really a sport you can keep up. You can't do pickup gymnastics the way you do a pickup game of basketball, which, I think left a big void. It had been so much of my identity from the time I was 3 until I graduated at 21, 22. And so I think candidly, founding Nimbus kind of filled that void. I needed something to spend all of my time and mental energy on because I was so used to having this all-consuming task that, once I graduated, I had so much time. I had nothing to do. I didn't know who I was. And so founding Nimbus kind of filled that void, which was great.
Yeah. Well, I've a million questions about Nimbus, but before we get there, you were at Credit Suisse for a while, I think, as an analyst, and then Away, the luggage company. What was the path to those things, and then how did you end up, diverging and opening Nimbus?
Yeah, it's been a very circuitous route. So in college, I ran our late night snack shack, which was effectively making grilled cheeses for drunk college students. It was not a super professional experience, but I set the menu, I shopped for the ingredients, I cooked on the line, loved that, did that for 3 years, ended up not going into hospitality. I ended at Away doing supply chain operations, was opening warehouses around the country, in Asia, in Europe. It was a great experience. It was very fun working at a high growth startup. I love operations. I love process. If you can't tell, I'm pretty type A. But I knew I wanted to get back to food. So I decided I was going to start my own food business. I was living in New York, in Lower Manhattan.
Was there an impetus for that? Was something that happened, or was it?
I'd always been, I hate when people are like, I'm a foodie, but I had always loved food. And I thought, based on my experience in college, which was so much fun, effectively running my own mini food business within the kind of walls of the university, I thought I could get back to that and wanted to start a healthy, macro-driven catering company geared towards athletes. It was something I would have really liked in college, eating to fuel your performance, not just to, subsist. But the issue was I couldn't find a kitchen to operate out of. In New York City, as you know, real estate's incredibly expensive. I was looking into signing a restaurant lease. You have to, give your firstborn child, sign a 10-year lease. The rents were astronomically expensive and it was just not feasible. Then I toured a bunch of shared commercial kitchen spaces. And
like Hannah, Me Kitchen, Soup Kitchen.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. And, I ended up doing research and there were over 50 in the New York City area. I know. A lot of them are
crazy.
In church basements or my buddy down the street who's renting his restaurant overnight or what have you. But they were typically in pretty remote locations. Very mom and pop operations. A lot of them didn't have heating or AC, which for me, coming out of this cushy university kitchen, which had all the bells and whistles, I was not prepared for. And they were operationally very inefficient. People signed up for their kitchen slots by signing up on a whiteboard. It's like, this is crazy. This is an industry that's stuck in the 80s. And I recognized that there was this white space where, on one end, there were really nice kitchens available, but they were very expensive. And on the other, there were affordable and flexible kitchens, but they weren't really what I was looking for in terms of a working environment. So pivoted away from starting a food business, decided to found Nimbus. I was 25.
Wow.
Candidly, I had no idea what I was doing. Definitely an outsider, but it's 5 years later now. We have 4 locations in New York and we're just getting started.
Yeah. Well, we're going to, obviously, we're about to talk about Nimbus, but walking the halls here, it's very clear that things are so tight and clean and organized. And I remember when I was, even when I had restaurants and we would do, bulk production of our relishes, let's say, or something, there's a place in Long Island City called Me Kitchen, Soup Kitchen. I think it's called that. Another one called Hannah. And, it's so different when I see this. What I had pictured versus what this is. It's just there. It's so clear that you're thinking about every discrete operator and how to make sure that you can maximize the amount of people that can work at the same time and how to share communal space. So I want to talk about some of the biggest differences between Nimbus and those kitchens. But maybe just to start, I'm thinking of the cloud when I think of this name, but where did the name come from? And then and now I know why you started it, but maybe just for the audience, just what is Nimbus?
Yeah, it's exactly that, cloud. When I was starting out, there was obviously this whole world of these shared kitchens that you toured and you were just talking about. At the same time, in 2019, 2020, there was a lot of money and capital and attention going towards what people hear of or kind of refer to as cloud kitchens or ghost kitchens. Travis Kalanick from Uber had started a shared kitchen company. He named it Cloud Kitchens. It kind of became synonymous with the industry itself. So I wanted to evoke that kind of cloud kitchen terminology, but also make sure to maintain that sense of flexibility. Because at the end of the day, and we can definitely get into the nuances of our business, people can come to Nimbus and cook in our space for a few hours. They can cook for a few years and everything in between. Nimbus sounds nimble. Nimbus is a kind of cloud. And then the added benefit is I was a big Harry Potter fan growing up, so people are always asking me about that as well.
Emily behind us, by the way, is hooting,
fist bumping.
Well, I think the nuance is actually what's important here because, if you think of a shared kitchen or a ghost kitchen, there's a pretty sort of it's not abstract. You understand what it is, but there's a lot of nuance to what you're doing here. So maybe just talk a little bit more about the details of why this, how you're improving upon the shared kitchen model, and then some of the ways in which you've gone about creating this operation.
Yeah, I can start by giving you like the 30 seconds of what Nimbus is and then talk about how we're different. High level, we're a co-cooking infrastructure business. So we're operating commercial kitchens and event spaces that we rent to food businesses hourly, monthly, and annually to run their production and promote their products. We're intentionally very flexible here. As I said, people can come for short or long periods of time. And because of that, we're able to work with food businesses across the industry from the nascent entrepreneur selling jams at the local farmer's market to the school lunch caterer who is making their meals in the mornings and then distributing them to schools around the city to very large operators like DoorDash or QSRs like Jersey Mike's that are in our space full-time running their deliveries out of this space and everything in between. I think one of the differences that really sets us apart and that's been core to our identity is our focus on community. The space that we're sitting in here is our show kitchen. In all of our locations, we have event spaces and show kitchens for our operators to, not only produce their food in the back of house, but actually promote their products to the people who are ultimately eating their food, whether that's through content production or through in-person experiences like cooking classes, dinner parties, tastings. That was something really important to us to help increase transparency between the consumer and the operator, and kind of maintain some semblance of the hospitality you'd get in a brick and mortar restaurant. I think the nuances between what we've done, ghost kitchens have gotten a lot of flack recently. People don't like the term, people don't like the industry. And I think rightfully so in a lot of ways. Ghost kitchens in their quote unquote traditional sense, they've kind of been around since, call it 2018, 2019. Typically only service delivery only businesses. They're typically only rented out on longer term contracts, so annual or multi-year contracts. And so they're only servicing a very small sliver of the hospitality industry. They're also typically in semi-industrial areas or in basement spaces. They're not visible to customers. And so there's kind of this lack of consumer trust because food coming out of those spaces is kind of scary if you don't know where your food is coming from or you've never seen the brick and mortar storefront. And so a big part of what we've done at Nimbus is increase that transparency, increase the flexibility so we're able to work with more businesses, and then professionalize this kind of shared kitchen industry that you had experience with and layer on operational efficiency to make it a very premium, flexible, but then also affordable product. So we're kind of taking the best of all of these different portions of the industry and rolling it into one, and then layering on the community focus. Yeah,
I love that, and I totally agree. I think one of the biggest missteps, and this just in my opinion, with ghost kitchens, virtual brands, is that I think everybody underestimated brand equity. That like you can't just have this black box of a brand that serves pizza, even if the pizza is delicious. Now, if the pizza is really delicious, essentially that helps a ton, right? And if you can do that consistently, then sure, that might actually work. But over time, people want a connection, and I love that you sort of like created this medium where you can not only like service your brand and service the customers, but you have this space where they can like build that connection, because I don't think it works without both of them. At least not perpetually. It might work in the short term, but
it might work if you have a splashy celebrity that is tacked onto your brand. That's not going to drive repeat purchase.
Yeah,
and
there's a half-life to that, right?
Totally.
Because at some point that celebrity will do something else or say something
canceled,
or whatever the thing is, and if you're relying on that, there's it's not an evergreen solution, and over time, or it's Mr. Beast, and things happen, and you have to create that connection with customers. I love that you've you saw that and created this, because independent of it, I don't think it works. You know?
Could not agree more. I mean, part of why we layered this on is I was thinking about when I was looking to start my own food business, how do I get customers? How do I actually get in front of them? It's impossible to stand out in such a saturated ecosystem, particularly in a place like New York City where there are thousands of operators. And it's that in-person experience or the brand recognition of walking by and saying, oh, I actually see their brand on the window. And so that's really why we intentionally from the beginning, and this has been part of our identity since we started in 2019, was to have that in-person interaction. We hosted 260 events here in our space last year. That's a lot of in-person interactions. But I think that also speaks to the demand from the brands and the operators that are using our space to get in front of the people who are actually consuming their food.
Yeah. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Like if you talk to somebody about what you're doing and they understand why and they see your face, they're gonna be far more likely to buy what you have. I want to talk about the actual the operators. But before we get into that, you clearly I'm making some assumptions, but just based on what I know of you and looking at your operation. You understand operations pretty well. I don't know if you ever read High Output Management by Andy Grove.
Haven't read that, but
I think
I'll take it down after this.
There's a notion of the black box, and there's the interworkings of a business, and actually he references a restaurant, and how understanding how each piece of the puzzle really works, and you have to open the black box and see. Anyways. It seems like you've really opened the black box and looked at how each piece of this needs to work and removed all of the painful parts of the operation just to let these operators cook. But can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've deployed that have really helped operators be more efficient, and or things that you've noticed from really good operators, because there's some really great operators here, sort of common threads that you've seen that make them really efficient? Because you obviously have to be. You have a small space, right? You got to put out a lot of volume. So operational efficiency is really, really key here.
It's a very good question, and operations is very much in my background and has been core to the business since day one. I think something that's interesting is I've done every job at Nimbus myself, mopping the floors, shoveling the sidewalks, doing the marketing, running our social until 3 months ago. I was doing that, which was very painful for me. And so I think I come to building the space and making it really efficient in a very empathetic way, because I've interacted with our members so much by physically being on the ground here and understanding what their unique pain points are. Running a business is, and particularly a food business, is very, very difficult. There are a lot of little nuances that people don't understand from the outside, from figuring out how to file your taxes, to making sure you have the right permit, to having the correct infrastructure and making sure that that's maintained. So at Nimbus, we make sure that infrastructure piece is taken care of. So we've built out the spaces, they're turnkey. An operator can waltz in and start cooking in a few days. If they're doing R&D, there's a waiting period if they want to sell to customers legally with the Department of Health. But in as little as a few weeks, if they're actually selling to customers, we do.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you have a Schedule C for them to be able to do?
Oh, I could talk to you about permits all day. So Nimbus has its own permit with the Department of Health. Uh-huh. And then each of the operators that works with us also has their own permit.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
We do also service some Article C Department of Agriculture businesses as well. That was a whole journey figuring out the nuances of the different permits. We're kind of operating in this gray area where we're an event space, we're a cafe, we're a shared kitchen, we're a standalone restaurant in some respects. And so we've spent probably 1,000 hours working with the DOH and DOA to make sure.
So this is, are you regulated by both?
Yes,
Ooh,
we're regulated by both, and we have inspectors on site every day.
That's rough.
So yeah, that's one of the things that we help our operators do is figure out what permit they should even have.
Yeah.
And then in terms of space maintenance, we do the pest control and the grease trap cleaning and the trash removal and all of the HVAC maintenance, like all the shit, excuse my language, that food businesses don't want to deal with. And so they can just, by nature of operating out of Nimbus, be significantly more efficient because their time isn't being stretched, just making sure that the infrastructure runs well. To answer the second part of your question in terms of, to your point, we do have some really amazing food businesses operating. Shout out to the Noma team. They came out here. They were the first people to operate out of our space. They flew 12 of their chefs from Copenhagen. They cooked here for a pop-up. We work with DoorDash is one of our biggest customers. We have Jersey Mike's in the space, some local heroes here in New York like King's Co. and Domo Domo, some really amazing businesses operating out of our space. I know this sounds basic, but having SOPs or standard operating procedures in place, but then constantly iterating on them has been a really big definer of success in the space. I think, you'd be shocked the number of businesses who come to Nimbus. They have passion. They love the food. They're so excited, but they don't have processes. They haven't thought through, what could happen, what could go wrong, and how am I going to react to that until those things are actually happening. And they're not able to scale because of that.
Yeah. You make such a great point that I think so many times the mistake is not. I think a lot of people actually write really good SOPs, but they have to be dynamic, right? You have to be able to, have a sort of this Kaizen approach to constantly iterating because things are always changing. And if you write this static document that lives forever and doesn't change, then eventually you're just going to start finding all these flaws and
you're going to become obsolete.
Yeah. Have you seen any examples where you've seen things, something change because of the space or the unit economics or something where you saw an operator change something that really stuck out?
I mean, I think it's interesting seeing, and this is more marketing focused, but I think there are obviously SOPs related to marketing as consumer preferences shift, even with the seasonality in a place like New York City. Everyone flees in the summer. Delivery kind of goes down. The businesses who had been thriving in delivery in Jan, Feb, March, maybe they're a pizza concept. People love pizza at the beginning of the year, maybe not so much when it's, bikini season in the summer. So they see this huge drop off in demand and they're looking at us like, hey, why has my demand gone down? Well, you have to iterate. Like, let's think of other ways to get in front of the end consumer, whether that's a different mode of distribution. Maybe we should lean into catering, or maybe we can jar your sauce and go the CPG route. Like, being able to iterate there, I think, has kept the strong operators within our space. But has ultimately been the downfall for other operators if they're not able to think on their feet there. Yeah.
It's funny. I remember having this conversation last season with a really great operator and leader named Dan Simon. He has this restaurant group called Founding Farmers. And we were talking about, in restaurants, there's this issue where if you have really great people, like a great CDC or a great, GM, oftentimes we find like the only way to have upward mobility is to open another restaurant because it's the only way for them to be able to, get promoted. And what's cool about restaurants and things like Nimbus is that you don't have to expand to new locations of a restaurant just because you need to, create more opportunity for your staff. You can horizontally expand. You could create a catering business. You could create a CPG business. You could create another delivery business. And it's such a cool opportunity that restaurants have to maximize the amount of top line they can do out of, whatever space they have. And this is just a great way to add on to that.
Yeah. And I most of the businesses that operate out of Nimbus have existing brick and mortar spaces, and they're using Nimbus to supplement their operation. To your point, whether that's launching a CPG brand or, moving their catering off-prem. And so I think that's exactly right. Yeah. It's a really creative way for them to grow without signing a 10-year lease and putting $1 million into a kitchen build.
I loved seeing that there was Cheesecake Factory, Ivan Ramen, and then clearly somebody doing R&D on the other side of the building that was like very meticulous about some, cookie or tweel that they were, I don't know what it was, but it was very clearly like, some really tight R&D that you have sort of all of these different diversities of operations. But the thing that I was thinking when you were taking us through the kitchens, like the first thing that came to my mind is I was seeing all the cages where everybody's dry goods and things are. And, a lot of operations are really particular about the ingredients they want. Like, I want this very specific vinegar or soy sauce or this dried, shiitake. How do you manage all of the disparate products that everybody wants to get in? Because I imagine there must be some broadliners, operation coming in here, but then there's got to be like independent, smaller, vendors as well. Like, how does that work?
This is a great example of iterating on an SOP. When we started, and we still do this, we automatically and from the beginning accepted ingredients for the members that come into our space. And it used to be kind of a free-for-all. It was very difficult to track whose ingredients went with which business.
Oh my God. Yeah. How do you do that?
How do you do that? Exactly. And we didn't really have a good process around sorting those ingredients. What do we do if something comes in and it's not food safe?
Mm-hmm.
Do we reject it? Do we let the members deal with it once they come on site? So we've spent the last 3 years of operation really streamlining that process. We accept ingredients for our members. We put them into a kind of neutral holding cage. We notify them. Everything's labeled very clearly. This is for XYZ business. This is for ABC business. And then once they come on site, they then transfer it into their own cages themselves. Of course, some of the operators are very particular. They want to make sure that their strawberries are a specific level of ripeness or whatever. Then they can come on site and do the ingredient receiving themselves. But it's a huge value add for the businesses coming into our space that they don't have to be here at 6 a.m. when Baldor rolls around. Nimbus can take care of it for them. And then when they come in at 10 a.m. or the next day at 6 a.m., they know that their ingredients are on site and fresh. But it took a very long time for us to really streamline that process.
Yeah, I'm also trying to wrap my head around. I mean, I have to assume there's like this economy of scale of you're able to, buy things in bulk, and two different operators both want Labeling sea salt or something, and then you have to split up a case, right? Like, how does that work? Like,
that's the dream for Nimbus, to be that intermediary. And, whether it's through a communal pantry or figuring out a way for us to buy in bulk for the members and pass on that preferential pricing to them. I think that's something that we've always talked about doing. We don't currently do it. Each member is responsible for ordering their ingredients themselves. Baldor might come and do one drop for 5 different members, but it's very clear what belongs to who. But in the dream scenario, we would have a full ingredient procurement arm where we can save our members a lot of money by that kind of bulk purchasing power. But we're not quite there yet. We're still focused on the infrastructure itself.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm picturing like this Amazon Go style warehouse where you just walk in, it knows who you are, and you grab your salt and your sugar. And anyway, so this launched, 5 years ago? Is that right?
Yeah, so I left my job at Away in 2019, summer of 2019.
Did you get a bunch of Away things, by the way?
Oh my gosh. We got a free suitcase every quarter.
Oh my gosh. Are they good?
They're incredible. I mean, obviously I'm biased. I worked there, but the product is superb.
They're smart, right? You can put like you plug in your phone and stuff.
There was no, this is a great aside. I have a lot to say. There was a little bit of drama with TSA in the battery pack. So they no longer offer the battery packs.
That's right. They make you take
you take them out. They don't even sell them anymore. That was one of the problems that on the operations team we dealt with when I was there. But it's a great product. I highly recommend. I've had my suitcase for 7 years now, and it's still fantastic. Anyway.
All right. We digress.
5 years. Yeah. So left that job in summer of 2019, signed the lease for our first space in January of 2020. We were supposed to start construction March of 2020. Horrible timing. COVID hit. We hadn't started construction. We didn't have our permits yet. And so I spent the better part of the summer figuring out how to get the permits so we could actually start construction on the space.
This was the Lower East Side, right?
The Lower East Side location. And it was a gray shell. Well, we thought it was a kind of salvageable restaurant setup. We ended up having to pull everything out, which was unfortunate, but a great learning. And we ultimately were able to open our doors in January of 2021. So I've been working on it for almost 5 years. We've been operational for 3. We opened this space here in downtown Brooklyn in May of 2022. And then in September of 23, we inherited 2 sites from an operator that was leaving the market. And so doubled our footprint overnight. And now we have 4 locations, 40 rentable kitchen spaces, 4 event spaces across that portfolio.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, we have like such a similar trajectory. I launched Meez tried to launch Meez in March of 2020.
So bleak.
And decided to do like a a way for chefs to sell their recipes for the first 6 months instead, and we didn't actually launch till January 2021. So we have like the exact.
We've been in the
timeline.
trenches at the same time.
Now we can follow along for the next 10 years of this. Well, anyways, I always have this. There's a picture in my office. With this sort of just question for myself. They're kind of all over, which is a little bit weird, but one of them, I always want to be embarrassed with what I did 5 years ago. And if I'm not embarrassed, then I haven't like moved along far enough, right? And I'm curious, it's been 5 years. Like, how do you feel like you're different as a leader, as an operator, as a person than you were when you started this whole ordeal?
I love that mentality. That's great. And it's a really great question. I mean, I was 25 when I started this. I hardly knew who I was as a person. So there's been a lot of personal growth, first and foremost. I made so many mistakes. I mean, I think every entrepreneur makes mistakes. I completely underestimated how long it would take to build out a kitchen space. I completely underestimated how expensive it would be to build out a kitchen space. I completely underestimated what it would be like to navigate the regulatory environment. I honestly think I was a little cocky coming into it because here I was, I'd run a late night snack shack at school thinking I knew everything about restaurants. Or I knew something about restaurants. And then I came in and was like, oh my gosh, the journey of a CPG brand versus a meal prep company versus a delivery concept versus a catering business, vastly different. And then you can get even more granular and say, okay, this kind of cuisine versus this other kind of cuisine makes it even more different. And where they are in that life cycle makes the unique needs of those businesses very different. And so I think kind of embarrassed to say that I thought we could be this one size fits all solution for all of those different kinds of concepts. And only after physically being open, talking with our customers as much as we have, being in the trenches, so to speak, like physically at those locations, did I realize that the nuances between those kinds of, food business or F&B concepps are great and cannot be underestimated. So it was certainly humbling.
Yeah. It's so funny because I actually wanted to ask you that because you didn't come from the restaurant world per se. Although you had some experience, obviously, but is there something that sticks out as like there was something that you really thought you understood well, and that now 5 years later after doing this, you're like, wow, I still don't actually understand this now that I've been doing this for a long time.
Oh my gosh. It's such a good question. I think a lot about what makes a member successful within our spaces. And I think we talked about operational efficiency. We talked about marketing. Those are both really important. But sometimes there's just like this secret sauce that makes somebody successful, whether they're a Nimbus or not, that I still haven't quite cracked. And so I think that's been really interesting. I do think coming from outside of the industry has been a really great asset. Largely because a lot of people underestimated us and me in specific. I was 25. I'm from outside the industry. I had no idea what I was doing. And that certainly fueled the fire. I also think it gave, I think when you've been entrenched in an industry for a really long time, you kind of accept the status quo as fact. And you say, okay, this 100%. Has been done for the last 5 decades. It must be a great strategy. And I think coming from outside of the industry allowed me to come in with a fresh perspective. And, when we were launching, just as like a little story, we were launching the Lower East Side space. The kitchen was fully built. Equipment was in place. Everything was gleaming. We were good to go. And we didn't have gas yet. And the last thing to get gas was to get the fire department in to inspect our ANSEL system or our fire suppression system. Everyone told me that was in the industry, it takes 12 to 16 weeks. That's how it's always been. COVID's made it worse. You just have to sit back and wait. And I was like, this is crazy. There's no way I'm going to sit for another 3 or 4 months to open this space that I've already waited way too long for because of COVID. And so I marched to Metro Tech, where the fire department sits. I somehow conned my way into the inspector floor, like past the security guard, forced the inspector to sign off on our plans. And lo and behold, we opened a week later.
Oh my God, it's crazy.
But I think that like scrappy mentality and like not taking no for an answer that wouldn't have been the case had I come from inside the industry, because I would have just accepted how things were. So I think it has been a benefit in a lot of ways.
100%. There's so, obviously there's a lot of benefits to domain experience. It helps you move faster and, with a lot of things. But yeah, there's so much of starting any business where, if you have a new perspective and you don't have all these cognitive biases, recency bias, where any of those things that impact your ability to have an idea that's contrarian and right, it's just very difficult if you don't have an outside perspective. So it really is. First of all, it's very difficult. I mean, the fact that you're able to build this, not having experience with kitchen operations, is pretty amazing. But it's and just impressive. But it's also, when it does work, it works really well, I think, clearly, which is what we're seeing here. But I love that. And I think this is like contrarian and right? This is not the way that we would think of, doing things. And it works. So I've been asking this question lately, because I give the background too often. So watch another episode of the podcast. You'll know why I ask this all the time, but I'm just going to ask you, what makes you angry? Like really angry, like blood boiling angry. Just what, something that you can think of that is like, when it happens, you just get so fucking mad.
It's such a good question. We actually ask it in our interview processes, because I think
really?
Yeah, I think it really gives you insight into how people think. You can see
and their values.
Yes. The EQ piece of how they're actually, talking about it. So it's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think kind of going back to people telling you no, it drives me nuts when people categorically say no and they don't try to get creative around how to make something work.
Me too. God.
There is always a way.
Yeah.
It might be roundabout. It might be kind of janky. It might be a Band-Aid solution, but we can figure out a way. And when people just say, no, not possible, and throw up their hands, that drives me absolutely up the wall. That's
so being closed-minded.
Yeah, being closed-minded. Exactly. And not being scrappy, not thinking creatively about how to solve problems. And that's exactly why we ask it in the interview process, because we are such a lean and scrappy team, and we make shit happen when everyone else tells us it's not possible. And so, it's really grinds my gears. It's so good. I'm glad you asked it.
I'm reminding myself now to put that into our interview process. It's such a good question. And it's actually very telling. And I think now thinking back at our conversation so far, it makes so much sense, because so much of what you do is that like, no, this still can't work. How do we make this happen in 1 week, not 16? So I love that. I want to go back for a second though, because, you were talking about, the mistakes you made early on, because we all make so many of them. And any business that you start, people usually see like this cool thing and they don't realize like it's basically like 90% fuck ups.
Totally.
And I'm curious, like if you have any methods or things that you do or therapy to separate the mistakes that you make and the tribulations of your business from who you are as a person.
Oh, that's a work in progress. We're not quite there yet. I do think the benefit of time, I've been now working on this for almost 5 years. I've made mistakes every single day. And I used to get so freaked out when I would make a mistake. I would reflect on it. I wouldn't sleep. It would feel like the end of the world. But I ended up pushing through and persevering and continuing on, and we're still standing here. So looking back, I say, okay, well, that thing that happened a year ago that I thought was the end of the world, I overcame. I can overcome anything. And so I think there's been this is a little depressing, but a little bit of desensitization where I'm like, well, it is what it is. There's nothing really I can do about this. I think having the amazing support network that I do in my husband, my friends, the team now has been really helpful as well, because we can kind of commiserate with one another and we say, okay, well, we made it past this crazy thing that happened previously. We can continue doing that. But it's obviously a work in progress. Yeah. Like I would be lying if I said I'm above it all and feeling peachy keen all day, every day.
It's such a necessary skill that is always a work in progress as an entrepreneur, because we're constantly making these mistakes and it's hard to not, and this is our business. So when something goes wrong, we feel like it's us.
You take it so personally.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm wrong, And so my wife bought me this well, it's a picture of a quote. I have a lot of quotes around my house. It's from this Stoic philosopher named Seneca, and I love it. And it's actually, we have two of them now, one in my room, one downstairs. It just says, "We suffer far more in imagination than in reality." And
love that.
yeah, it was because so often we're like down and we're upset, and it's like, wait a second, hold on, what's actually wrong right now? I made a mistake. Now let's move on.
I also think people care about you a lot less than you think they do.
Yes. Yes.
Like it was like a little bit of like a narcissism check.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, nobody's actually talking about me.
Yeah.
Or nobody thinks I'm that crazy. I'm just like in my head about it. And being able to kind of move beyond that
oh my gosh,
has
totally
been a process.
I know. But by the way, that always, I mean, I don't know about you. I'm always like having to check myself like, hey man, no one really cares.
Totally.
I'm
not that special.
Yeah, well, but do you have any like well, I'm going to sort of shift a little bit. So because we already talked about like managing mental health. We can talk about that more if you want. But I find that like, especially now with kids, I have to be maniacal about how I manage my time. And I have all of these sort of tools and systems and my assistant, everybody just trying to help me make sure that like I fit, 150 hours of work in 50 or 60. Do you have any like tools or processes that you use for time management?
Yeah. And I think actually my life doing gymnastics and being so stretched for time growing up, when I graduated, I had so much more time. So that experience and effectively growing up with no time at all was very helpful. It sounds pretty antiquated, but I use the notes app on my phone. A lot of people laugh. I've tried Monday.com. I've tried Asana. I've tried all of these fancy, Trello task management tools. None of them have worked. The notes app is
But how do you use the notes app?
So I have a running list and it's in 3 buckets. The first is things I need to accomplish today. That's the urgent stuff, the meetings that I know I've committed to. There's stuff that needs to get done tomorrow. And then there's longer term stuff. I find if I try to plan out, like I'm going to accomplish this in 2 weeks on a Tuesday, it's very hard to stick to those timelines. Yeah. And so I have those 3 buckets that are much more immediate. So today, tomorrow, and then longer term. And every morning I look at that list, I reorder and reprioritize what I'm meant to do. And then I post it on Slack for my whole team to see. And actually the whole team does this now, where I say, this is all I'm going to accomplish today. This is what I said I was going to accomplish yesterday. And by the way, I had to shift this one thing because of whatever. And it just increases that transparency. And also because I do it first thing, it really keeps me on track. I know, okay, I have these 10 things I must do, or these 2 things I must do. Everything else can be shifted if I need. And I'm going to tell the world, the entire team, what I'm doing. Yeah. So it's almost embarrassing if you don't get those tasks done. And I don't log off until those tasks are complete, obviously, if they're urgent. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of putting putting it out there, and then you create that pressure. I think I've been doing that since the minute I left my home and just started in professional world. I remember when I was like, just got to New York and I was cooking, and I told everybody, I'm flying to Mexico. I just started telling all my friends, I'm flying to Mexico. I'm going to go spend a bunch of time in Oaxaca. I don't have any money to do this or anything, but I just told everybody. And finally, like everyone was asking, when are you going to Mexico? So like, I bought a ticket, went to Mexico. The same thing with like, so many things. If you create that social pressure, it's such a great way to, to force yourself into those things. It's also a really great way to clear blockers. So part of what I do is say, hey, I have this hold up because I need something from XYZ person, or I'm really struggling with this, and I post it. And then the team can react and clear those blockers at the beginning of my day. And it just keeps everyone in sync. And it creates the social pressure to get. Yeah. Do you schedule time for strategy and just think? Yes. Calendar blocking is also a big tool for me. Yeah. I live and breathe by my calendar. Yeah, same. So I say, okay, I'm transiting now. I'm walking my dog now. Mm-hmm. I'm doing my deep work from 2 to 4. Nobody bother me. Yep. Don't schedule a meeting during this time. I find it very hard. And that's part of what I do in the morning. When I put my task list out there, I then actually schedule the time to do those specific tasks. I find when you're constantly context switching, or if you have 100 items that you need to complete in a given week or a given day, it's very difficult and overwhelming. So time blocking, it gives me this sense of control to be able to accomplish what I totally agree. It was so eye-opening
I use this app now called Reclaim that I have to stop talking about unless they start paying me because I talk about it all the time. I'm like obsessed with it.
This is your sign, Reclaim.
I was looking for something like this for a long time because I'm the same thing. Like if it's on my calendar, it's not happening. Yeah, and I don't know if anybody right now that has a to-do list, if you look at your to-do list and the amount of time it takes to do each of those things isn't the amount of time that you have in your calendar, it's not happening.
No, and it's very stressful and you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
Totally.
So it has to be in the calendar. I love Reclaim because it uses AI to shift my calendar. So I have blocks for strategy, blocks for partnership outreach, blocks for just mindfulness, 5 minutes to think, blocks for content. And it used to be that I would put that in my calendar at noon on a Thursday or something, and that's when this happens. And it was me first, and then my assistant, and she's driving both of us nuts. Like each time it'd be like, oh yeah, well this is really important, so we're gonna have to. And sometimes it was like I actually needed that slot for an investor or a customer that that's the only time that they could talk, and I want to make sure so now it just moves everything around and still make sure I keep the block, but it will move it up or back or to a different time. So I always make sure that I have, 2-hour blocks a week of strategy and 2-hour blocks a week of content and whatever else. And I don't have to worry about it. Like I know that no matter what
That's amazing. I mean, it's like going back to the SOPs, but being flexible on those SOPs and constantly iterating, like have the process, have the parameters in place, but allow there to be iteration within a week. I need to check out this product.
You should check it out. Each of them, you create these habits and
you've just sold another customer.
You can create priority levels. So like one will, if something has priority over another, we'll sort of shift it and and I'm not gonna talk about this app anymore because they need to start paying me. I literally posted about it on LinkedIn. I've talked about it twice now on the show, so I'm done.
Make a calendar block to reach out to them to get this paid sponsorship. Yeah. I think that's important.
Okay, so we talked about 5 years ago to now. I don't know if you do sort of future thinking or like the 11 star experience type thing, or but have you thought about what this business is in 5 years?
I have quite a lot. It's funny, if I look back at my 2019 self, I said I'd have 100 of these kitchens by now.
Oh, yeah.
We have 4. So really hit the mark there. But in all seriousness, I do think we will have a presence in every major metro eventually. I want to be really measured about that growth. I think a lot of people who raised a lot of money expanded way too quickly and ended up spreading themselves too thin. And opened a bunch of sites around the country and then couldn't manage them effectively. So we're going to grow as quickly as we can while still maintaining the quality of our on-the-ground operations and the quality of the member experience. We're expanding to a new market soon in Q2, announcement coming soon, which is very exciting. It'll be our first facility outside of New York City.
Very exciting.
Yeah, we're very excited about that. And I do see the opportunity to have these in every major city around the US and have between 3 and 10, depending on the market size within those cities. So continuing to grow our physical footprint. And then I also think continuing to deepen the member experience and make it better for our customers. So once they come into the Nimbus facilities, what are the services we can provide to keep the customers within our 4 walls and make them successful? If they're a package. Yeah. So there's a lot of that we can do there. We're still kind of in the, we built out our 2024 plan, but we did it for 6 months because we're moving so quickly and so much changes. I have my H1 plan.
Yeah.
And then in a few months, I'll do H2 because we're kind of in that hyper growth phase where things change so quickly. Yeah, we do the same thing. Do you leverage the OKR process or a different way of setting goals? This is embarrassing, but no, we've tried.
I've done it now at 3 companies. Yep. And every single time failed. I think I'm actually working on writing an article about it works now for us, but it is. Give
me your tips because it's so hard.
It's a longer conversation, but it takes a lot of work, and you also have to be at the right time to do it, because if your company is like shifting a lot. It actually sometimes doesn't make sense to do the OKR process.
No, it does. I mean, I was on my honeymoon this past summer and I found out that these 2 facilities were coming up for grabs. We negotiated that deal, moved into the spaces in 6 weeks. You can't plan for that.
No.
You can't reflect that in OKRs. And then obviously the entire company strategy shifted.
Yeah.
Same with our expansion to this new market. It's been a very quick process. Yeah. And I think we're just moving at a speed right now where it doesn't necessarily make sense.
It might not make. Have you read Measure What Matters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least
Great
you've
book.
done that. You've done that work. So
I think it's important eventually, but right now we've tried and it's just never worked.
Yeah. It's good to know when it's just not the right time. One thing that you said that I really loved, and I don't remember where it was an article, some interview, and I think it was recently. You were talking about operational scalability. And I'm like, I've realized recently that like, creating scale is sort of my mission in life. Like I love to help people scale their vision. And it's why I do so many things scale their recipes, scale their business, those things. I'm kind of obsessed with it. And you said something that like really, was so poignant and I had never thought about before, as it relates to growing a business and scaling a business, because you said part of operational scalability is also the ability to scale back, to dial back. And I love that. How do you think about that as you're like growing this business?
I think being able to admit when you've made a mistake or you've gone in the wrong direction is just as important as forging ahead and trying new things. An example, we got a lot of pressure in the early days, and particularly when we were trying to raise money from potential investors saying that we need to build a tech product to help us scale. So we built out a booking and billing app. Cost a lot of money, took a lot of time. We're not a tech company. We're an infrastructure business. We did not have the resources to do that effectively. And our members hated the product. We rolled it out, and a year later, we scrapped it. And everyone was saying, this is exactly what you need to scale. Well, turns out there's a great off-the-shelf product, the food corridor, that we can use. We used them when we launched. It was perfectly wonderful then. We moved over to the app. Everyone hated it. We scrapped it. Now we're back on the food corridor and we're sticking with them. So I think the ability to, recognize those mistakes and scale back some of those bets is really important. And particularly before you pay a lot of money to do that. I think also just in terms of operational scalability, understanding that just because something works in one market, like here in New York City, we have our operation down pat. That doesn't mean that's going to work in LA or Chicago or Denver or wherever you're going to go next. And understanding the nuances of individual markets is very important.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Especially, even just thinking about the Department of Health. It's the Wild West in some of these other markets. It's completely different. And what they look for is very different than what they look for here in New York. And being able to take the foundation of what you've built in market one, take like 80% of it and then iterate on that 20% is also really important.
Yeah. And it's so funny. We opened a spot in Chicago, and with a concept that worked. It was just crushing it in New York. Identical concept in Chicago, completely failed. And because we just sort of, transplanted it over there, and people are different.
Customers are different.
Like
DOH
so
is
much
different. Yep.
Everything. Okay. So in thinking about like 5 years from now, maybe broader, right? If you had like unlimited resources and time was, now somehow you broke the laws of physics, and what could happen in 10 years could happen in a year, what would you do with this business?
I love this question. It's so much fun. This also, I think, should be an interview question. You've got my wheels turning there. Yeah. I think that's a good kind of exercise in people's creativity. If we had unlimited resources, I would very much focus them on building out the member experience. So going back to those unique...
Who's the member?
So the customers that cook in our spaces, we call them members. Yep. We like to be community oriented. But if you look at our member base right now, it's about 20% delivery concepts, 20% catering, 20% CPG, 20% bakers. And then the rest is this mixed bag of R&D and meal prep and chefs doing pop-up. And, there are a lot of different concepts there. I would love to have one person staffed on the team focused on each of those customer cohorts. what can we do at Nimbus to make the delivery businesses successful? What can we do to make the CPG brand successful, the catering concepts successful, and have the resources in-house to improve their experience? I think we figured out the infrastructure side, but like, what are the services we can layer on top of that to make coming to Nimbus something that's not just a, stopgap while they're building out their own brick and mortar, but something that's, a solution for them long-term. So would love to build out our member experience team. We have somebody who's overseeing that right now. He's wonderful. There's just too much work for one person. So I would have a whole army of people focused on that. And then I would have more kitchens. I think part of why we've grown, quote unquote, more slowly is because we are a super lean team. There are 7 of us overseeing these 4 locations. We just haven't had the headcount to move as quickly as demand would point to. We sold out of our spaces, our long-term kitchens pretty quickly at the first 2 locations, which is why we felt great about taking on facilities 3 and 4. So, if we had unlimited resources, I would just have a bunch of these, but I'd have enough people in place to make sure that we could maintain that operational product and the operational efficiency that we have.
Cool. I'm going to push you a little bit more. Unlimited.
Go ahead. Unlimited.
So, if the most magical experience for one of these folks, they come in and they see the space they want, and tomorrow it just suddenly exists for them. It's completely spec'd out with their equipment, and the shelves are are there things that, like, if you think about, maybe not even realistic, but maybe they could become realistic, are there things that you wish could just happen?
I mean, yes, I have so many things I wish could happen.
Give me a couple.
Okay. I look at our sales process right now. When our long-term businesses come in and want to rent space for a year, 2 years, we'll customize the kitchens for them. There's definitely a way to make that process more efficient, where we can really easily visualize what the kitchens are going to look like, very clearly tell them how long it's going to take to turn the kitchen. Right now, it's kind of finger in the air, and we're mocking things up on Canva ourselves. It's very janky. Would love to professionalize that experience. Would love to streamline the customer, the member experience, as I said. Would love to actually have services beyond, once you're at Nimbus, like a Nimbus downtown Brooklyn or a Nimbus Lower East Side. Maybe there's a suburban model where these members want to expand outside of these hyper-dense locations.
By the way, please bring this to Northern Westchester. We desperately need.
Yes. There are shared kitchens up there.
No, I mean this. Bring this.
This specific model. Yeah. I think there's so many ways we can go.
You talked about the warehouse, right?
Totally. We could really double down and have Nimbuses specifically for CPG operators. Mm-hmm. We could have Nimbuses specifically for delivery only businesses. We could have turnkey event products where we say, hey, you're a catering business, you do tastings, we'll put that on for you so you don't have to worry about that, on top of not worrying about the infrastructure. I think there are so many directions we can go. I definitely suffer from shiny object syndrome, where I have an idea and I'm like, great, let's do it. I get super excited. So part of, this journey is making sure we stay focused and solve problems that our members actually have.
Yep.
We've had ideas and our members are like, we don't need that. Don't go down that route.
Yeah.
So I like the pie in the sky thinking, but also want to make sure that it's.
No, I agree. I find it's I'm the same way, by the way. I try to really push those things down, but every once in a while, I find it's really helpful to. I talked about this, I think, the last couple episodes as well. I love the Airbnb 11-star experience. They're playing out what would this magical experience be like. And usually, what ends up happening is you think about the crazy thing that just seems impossible, but then you find some little nugget of oh, actually, you know what? We could probably do something.
Yeah.
Small that could accomplish a piece of that. After I got done with this tour and we sat down, the first thing I thought was, I wonder if you could help fund some of these companies.
Oh, that is a great idea. The incubation piece, and whether you take equity or, whatever that might be, I think that's a really great idea and definitely something we'd be interested in. The reason we haven't gone down that route just yet is we're typically operating a little bit further downstream, where the members are already established and don't necessarily need that funding. But absolutely, if we could build out real incubation services where we can say, hey, you're starting your hummus company. You've never worked in food before. Let us walk you through the process of how to incorporate your business, how to file your taxes, what a P&L even is. And by the way, we're going to take a piece of the pie and help you be successful. That would be great. It's just, I think, very operationally intensive.
Yeah.
But if I had unlimited resources, it would be fantastic.
There you go. And I even think about there are restaurants that, that crush it, right? And maybe they have a couple products like, PJ Calappa's like bomba, his little like antipasta thing. Like you could just go to a restaurant and say, hey, you know what? We can package that for you. You don't have to do anything. We'll take care of the production and the distribution and all the rest. And, I feel like that's a huge opportunity too, where if you start creating more of these, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of like,
no, I love the ideas. And I think, ultimately we will move to a place where we vertically integrate like that. Mm-hmm. I think part of the downfall of a lot of the players is they did that prematurely.
Yes. Yeah. So I love that you're taking it slow.
Yeah. It's, running a commercial kitchen is very operationally intensive. It takes a lot of time and energy and resources. And the competitors of ours that went out and then they said, hey, we're actually going to start virtual brands as well. And we're going to build out tech. Mm-hmm. Commercial real estate or commercial kitchens, tech, and running a restaurant, very, very different businesses with very different skill sets. And I think a lot of the people in the space who tried to do that too soon fell flat. Yeah. So we've been very methodical about and measured about that growth. But that's not to say that there isn't room for that in the future.
Yeah, well, it's clear, and let's bring it back to reality now.
Back to earth.
To close things up, is there anything else that you think I haven't asked you that would be interesting to discuss, or that we didn't talk about Nimbus, or anything you just want to share generally with this audience?
Well, it's interesting because most of the conversations I've had in the last couple of months are about the death of ghost kitchens. There has been a lot of negative press around this ghost kitchen in this industry. And a lot of the conversations I have are around like, hey, this model does work if executed correctly. And, here's how we're different. And so I think that's something I would want to impart on your audience is, commercial kitchens and shared commercial kitchens have been around for decades. It was just a very, very fragmented and mom and pop industry until recently when ghost kitchens came onto the stage. Ghost kitchens are only focused on delivery. They're kind of ignoring all these other ways or modes of distribution for food. But when executed correctly, that kind of combo between the old school shared commissaries and the newer school ghost kitchens, the model really does work. They can make money for the operator like Nimbus. We're profitable. They can make money for the businesses that are operating within the four walls. We've had members within our space for literally 3 years since we launched. And it's a really viable way to scale a business, particularly when you have this community-facing aspect and you can get in front of those end consumers. So I would like to formally say that, sure, ghost kitchens are dead, but co-cooking infrastructure in the form that Nimbus has taken is alive and kicking and just continuing to grow.
Well, being here today, I can attest to that.
Thank you.
This was awesome.
This was so much fun.
Yeah, thank you.